Peter B. Collins, News and Comment. It's Thursday, June 1st, 2017. Donald Trump looks to Paris and the planet and says, drop dead. Pandering to ignorant voters and desperate workers, Trump has announced that he is pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord that has been approved by all but two other nations, Syria and Nicaragua. And it makes us an outlier on the planet, and it puts the short-term interests of American resource extractors ahead of the safety and future of the planet. And I know there are plenty of people who are skeptical about the climate change argument. But the idea that coal is going to enjoy a resurgence and that miners in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and elsewhere will be back at work soon, that is a cynical myth advanced by Trump. Because it's not reaction to climate change or regulations that have changed the fortunes of the coal industry. And to pretend that coal is clean, and to be fair, Obama used those words, and they were no more credible from his lips than from Trump's. But it's a pure fantasy to believe that backing out of what is essentially a non-enforceable agreement, with a lot of wiggle room, and that is going to cause American industry to expand, job opportunities to grow. In his Rose Garden speech, he falsely stated that these regulations, if they were left in place and if we honored the terms of the U.S. commitments under Paris, that we would lose $3 trillion in lost gross domestic product and 6.5 million industrial jobs. He made that shit up. Because it's clear that any job losses could be offset to some extent by job gains in the so-called clean energy sector. But fundamentally, this was a political statement where Trump is attempting to reassure the angry white voters who put him into office that he's going to carry out those bizarre campaign pledges that he made on the campaign trail last year. He said, we're getting out, but we will start to negotiate, and we will see if we can make a deal that's fair. If we can, that's great. If we can't, that's fine. But any deal that he makes is going to allow for more pollution, more carbon emissions. And even if you don't believe that that contributes to the warming of the planet, you want to live with more pollution? You actually want to see the United States burn more coal over the next 10 or 15 years? It's irrational, and in some respects, it is suicidal. Here's a good comment from Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, Democrat from Rhode Island. Ignoring reality and leaving the Paris Agreement could go down as one of the worst foreign policy blunders in our nation's history, isolating the U.S. further after Trump's shockingly bad European trip. Trump is betraying the country in the service of Breitbart fake news, the shameless fossil fuel industry, and the Koch brothers' climate denial operation. It's sad. Gina McCarthy, who was Obama's final EPA administrator, said this decision makes zero sense from a public health or an economic perspective. It's contrary to science and his obligation to protect America's kids and future generations. It's contrary to investors and CEOs saying we need to lean in on climate action, not bury our heads in the sand. And it's contrary to the vast majority of Americans calling for our country to do more. Well, Governor Moonbeam, Jerry Brown here in California, isn't sitting still. He is calling on states to forge an alliance to support the terms of the Paris climate deal as a way of neutralizing the impact of Trump's decision. Brown said that although individual states can't sign on to the Paris Agreement, he said state leaders should step up to demonstrate the nation's support. And I'll have to say that Jerry Brown talks a good talk about climate change. Here in California, we're frustrated because he has not addressed fracking. And he seems to argue that, during the transition to cleaner energy sources, that California should frack the hell out of our underground. And I just don't agree with him on that. But he has emerged as a leader, calling for local governments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 80 to 95% below 1990 levels by 2050. He also has taken the lead in promoting the cap-and-trade system. And I don't really embrace the market approach to reducing carbon output, but it's all we have. And the idea of direct regulation of carbon output doesn't seem to be attainable or achievable at this point. And Brown, who is embarking tomorrow on a 3-city tour of China, where he's going to tout climate change regulation and issues, he is very committed, at least in his own terms, to promoting his point of view and to getting an extension of the Schwarzenegger-era cap-and-trade system that was put into place here in California. And in the past year, it hasn't been active. People are not buying the carbon credits, therefore the money isn't there to buy remediation, to invest in cleaner energy, and to help consumers offset the probable increase in the cost of energy. Now, as Trump pandered to his base today, he quietly let them down on another front, and I couldn't be more delighted. He signed an order keeping the American embassy for Israel in Tel Aviv rather than moving it to Jerusalem as he had promised during last year's campaign as he pandered to Zionist American voters. Now, aides tell us this is just a delay, but the document he signed lasts for 6 months. And he, of course, got a whole lot of pushback from the King of Jordan and other regional leaders who say that this could spark a very violent reaction. And this is a case where Trump actually appears to have been listening. But he doesn't listen when it comes to the conflict of interest issues, the cronyism that his appointees demonstrate. And the White House has relented and published the information about 16 staff members who have been given special waivers because they worked in private sector jobs, typically as lobbyists, that conflict directly with their roles in the Trump administration. And the guy who said he was going to drain the swamp has given special passes to swamp dogs to stay there and soak it up. The waivers includes people like Reince Priebus and Kellyanne Conway, but let me focus on 2 of the 16 that I think are very important. One is Michael Catanzaro, and his role as a lobbyist for Devon Energy and Talon Energy, a coal-burning electric utility, was exposed by Steve Horn of Blog a few weeks ago. Now, he is an advisor to the White House on the very issues that he was a registered lobbyist for last year. Here's another example, a woman named Shahira Knight, who had been a lobbyist for Fidelity Investments and now serves as a special assistant to the president for tax and retirement policy. And you can bet she's pushing for tax cuts on capital gains and other issues that would benefit the investor class and her former employers or client at Fidelity Investments. They've also cleaned up the problem of Steve Bannon. He got a waiver so that he can talk to his old pals at Breitbart. It is breathtaking. It truly is. We are told that absent a presidential invocation of executive privilege, that former FBI Director James Comey will testify in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee next Thursday, a week from today. We'll see if Trump at some point does try to restrict or even block testimony by Comey. It is possible, and there is some validity to a president trying to keep his own consultations private, and we do have strong precedents in that regard. Meanwhile, Devin Nunes, who has recused himself, kind of, from the House Intelligence Committee and its investigation of Trump/Russia. He quietly submitted requests for subpoenas, I think 3 of them at least, related to claims that Obama administration officials unmasked Trump administration or Trump campaign members whose conversations were intercepted when they talked to the Russian ambassador or similar parties. And while I do think that everything is worthy of investigation, and I really don't object to pursuit of the truth there, Devin Nunes said that he has stepped down. He's not involved in the Trump-Russia investigation, and now, once again, he is carrying water and running interference for the Trump White House. Today, I'm releasing to my subscribers at peterbcollins.com a fresh interview with journalist Robert Parry, the founder and editor of consortiumnews.com, and a man who I respect, who has not gotten sucked into the Trump-Russia narrative. He remains skeptical and demanding proof, and he talks about the wave that he calls a new McCarthyism and how Democrats and progressives eager to dump Trump seem to be willing to set some really bad precedents in the process. Here's an excerpt from my in-depth interview with Bob Parry.
So we have a very imperfect system called the Electoral College, and it is the way we have chosen presidents. Now, if people want to try to change that and go back into the Constitution, that's one thing. But to sort of turn to the supposedly objective professional press corps and to turn to the bureaucracy in the name of the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, and other intelligence community entities, and have those groups decide, the American people made a mistake, the constitutional process misfired here, so we're going to fix it for you. And that seems to be what we're heading toward, an effort to remove a person that many of the smart folks in Washington have concluded is unfit to be president. And so the judgment of the public, as conveyed through our constitutional process, is going to be vetoed, negated, and he's going to be thrown out of office. That seems to be the goal here, and and people should understand how serious that step is, because as faulty as our system is, with the exception of the Civil War, this has helped this country avoid the kind of political violence and conflict that many other countries have been beset by.
I invite you to listen to the complete interview. It runs less than an hour with Robert Parry. I've released it today to subscribers at peterbcollins.com, at iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spreaker, and other outlets where you find the PBC podcast. And all of this, of course, is made possible by my subscribers, including my favorite Nixon, Pauline Nixon, a dedicated monthly subscriber. Ford Green just renewed his annual subscription. Thank you, Ford. And also Diane Poland just took out a new subscription to the Peter B. Collins podcast. We certainly welcome one and all, and I invite you to join in. Come on over and check it out. Visit peterbcollins.com, pull on the menu button, click on that, and then you get become a subscriber. You click on that. It takes you to the sign-up page, and you can see the array of options you have there. If you take out a new annual subscription for $50 and give me a mailing address in the continental U.S., I will reward you with one of the bonus books displayed on the sign-up page. And while we're talking about support, my friends Roger and Carol Schuler are at risk again. Roger is the courageous journalist who has exposed a lot of the corruption in Alabama. They continue to live week to week in a shabby motel in Missouri. And if you can help them, please do. Visit legalschnauzer.blogspot.com, and their PayPal link is prominently displayed right there at the top of the page. Now, speaking of the Trump-Russia narrative, we have a new, at least based on leaks to The Guardian, a new person of interest in the FBI investigation. And that would be Nigel Farage, who campaigned with Trump. He's a British citizen. He helped lead the Brexit campaign in Britain last year. And he's a close friend of Steve Bannon's. They've been tight for a while. And Farage is described as a person of interest. He is not accused of wrongdoing, not a suspect at this point, but it means that investigators believe he may have information about the acts that are under investigation. And I will note that The Guardian doesn't cite a source. It says sources with knowledge of the investigation shared this information with them. The Washington Post has another unsourced report on Trump-Russia. They assert that the administration is moving toward returning to Russia two diplomatic compounds that were basically taken over by the U.S. government under the orders of Barack Obama last December. And this was alleged described as a penalty for Russia's alleged interference in the 2016 presidential election. One is located near New York City, the other on Maryland's eastern shore. And without citing any sources, the Washington Post says that the Trump administration told Russians that it would consider turning the properties back over if Moscow would lift its freeze on construction of a new U.S. consulate in St. Petersburg, Russia. 2 days later, we are told, again without attribution, that Secretary of State Rex Tillerson removed the reciprocal demand, and it appears that the U.S. is ready to return access to these properties to Russia, despite the allegations by the Obama team that these were intelligence bases, that this is where spying was occurring. So that's in the works, and again, based on unsourced information cited by the Washington Post. A new lawsuit has been aimed at James O'Keefe. He is the videographer who selectively edits his pieces and then serves them up to Breitbart and other right-wing outlets. And the most recent lawsuit filed today in Washington, D.C., alleges that one of his operatives, a woman named Allison Moss, posed as a progressive activist and used undercover videos and other forms of surveillance. She's alleged to have pilfered a large cache of documents from a group called Democracy Partners, which is a commercial Democratic campaign consulting firm. The leader of that is Bob Kramer, who is the wife, he is married to Jan Schakowsky, a Democratic congresswoman from the North Shore of Chicago. And what's interesting in this story at The Intercept is that O'Keefe has been using the Sinclair Broadcast Group. This is kind of off the radar for most people unless you have a Sinclair station in the city where you live. Sinclair is the cheapest broadcast operator. No matter where you watch one of their stations, the weather forecasts, I'm told, originate from a warehouse in Baltimore, and they use a lot of other cost-cutting measures. They also have a pronounced right-wing tilt. They ran a critical film of Hillary Clinton that led to the Citizens United decision back in 2008. And it appears that O'Keefe has had a warm and fuzzy relationship with Sinclair. Also, we've learned that the Trump Foundation, which is notoriously cheap and typically takes other people's money and gives it away, awarded a $10,000 grant to O'Keefe's Project Veritas. You may recall that 2 weeks ago when the president, the strong man from Turkey, whose name is Erdogan, was visiting Washington, D.C., he visited the White House and then went back to the Turkish embassy where there were some American protesters. And it's not clear if he ordered his security goons to do it, but they went after the protesters, they beat them, they kicked them, and they basically behaved like thugs. Well, it turns out that that very group, the Presidential Security Detail of Turkey, was awaiting a shipment of 1,600 semi-automatic pistols made in the United States in New Hampshire by Sig Sauer, and that the State Department had given provisional approval under the Arms Export Control Act. But final approval has not been granted, and Democratic Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland appears to be prepared to block the sale of those weapons as a way of expressing dissatisfaction and protest to the behavior of these Turkish security officers. As you may have heard, Hillary Clinton appeared at Recode, a conference here in California, yesterday, and her videotaped comments have been widely played on MSDNC and perhaps on other networks. I'm linking to Kevin Gostola's breakdown of the comments at Shadowproof today, and he describes how Trump is often described as a post-truth president, but Hillary Clinton has crafted her own alternative reality about why she lost the 2016 election. And he says that this guarantees that the liberal class, or at least a subsection of it, will fail to confront the truth of why Clinton didn't win and likely engage in the same politics that led to one of the most embarrassing defeats in American history. And he quotes Clinton as saying, "I take responsibility for every decision I made, but that's not why I lost." That's really taking responsibility, isn't it? She said she lost because the Russian government and the country's military, WikiLeaks, Guccifer, DC leaks, and Trump's campaign weaponized information. Here's a quote from Hillary. "Best example, within 1 hour of the Access Hollywood tapes being leaked, within 1 hour, the Russians, let's say WikiLeaks, same thing, dumped the John Podesta emails. Now, if you've ever read the John Podesta emails, they are anodyne to boredom. They were run-of-the-mill emails, especially run-of-the-mill for a campaign. Now, that is flatly untrue. I have read many of the John Podesta emails, and many of them raise serious conflicts of interest. And in my conversation with Robert Perry today, I brought that up. How the memo from Doug Band called Bill Clinton Incorporated showed how the sordid arrangements with millions of dollars in speaking fees from parties who have an interest before the U.S. government were scheduled to be paid to Bill while his wife ran the White House. And that's just one example. The conflicts of Huma Abedin, Clinton's personal aide at the State Department, who was also on the foundation payroll and separately on the payroll of Doug Band, who ran the foundation. It's really disgusting. It's not anodyne. It's not run-of-the-mill. And yet the corporate media either hasn't bothered to read the emails or doesn't care to correct this outrageous lie. And Bob Perry also noted that Clinton repeated the claim that 17 intelligence agencies had claimed that Russia hacked and tried to manipulate the election, and even the leaders of those intelligence agencies under Obama have said that's flatly not true. So the other key claim that she made is that the DNC let her down. She says when she became the nominee, quote, "I inherit nothing. It was bankrupt. It was on the verge of insolvency. Its data was mediocre to poor, non-existent, wrong. I had to inject money into it, the DNC, to keep it going." Now, first of all, she is indicting Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the chair of the DNC, who resigned in disgrace after the Podesta emails surfaced, showing how Wasserman Schultz had tilted in favor of Clinton over challenger Bernie Sanders. And if it was bankrupt, it was because the Clinton campaign laundered money through the DNC. Remember the big contributions that came from people like George Clooney that were supposed to be passed along to state parties and to individual campaigns downstream? Well, that never happened. And keep in mind that when Hillary complains that the DNC was bankrupt, her campaign outspent Trump 2-1. So what she is saying is romanticized, rewritten history, in my opinion. But one of the people who she implicitly criticized is a guy named Thoreau, Andrew Thoreau, T-H-E-R-R-I-A-U-L-T. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. But he said today's accusations, referring to Hillary, are fucking bullshit. And I hope you understand, he's saying to his team, the good you did despite that nonsense. Now, he took down some of his tweets because he felt they were getting too much attention. But he really, I think has honest criticism of these off-base claims made by candidate Clinton. He said the irony of her bashing DNC data, our models never had Michigan, Wisconsin, or Pennsylvania looking even close to safe. Her team thought they knew better. So this kind of discussion, I think, is really healthy because there are so many Clinton supporters who hold on to the mythology. They are desperately loyal to her, and they cannot allow facts to creep in to explain that, well, may not have been Russia, may not have been Comey. It may have been arrogance and incompetence in her campaign. And I think that those are much more likely explanations. And Tom Bonnier, who also worked in the DNC data operation, he says the data operation Clinton inherited was the most robust data operation the DNC has ever seen, including during the Obama re-election in 2012. So Hillary's trying to rewrite history. And when she flatly claims that WikiLeaks and Russia are the same thing, I'm sorry. There is no evidence currently to prove that. And if she's got evidence that would prove it, bring it on, Hillary. Bring it on. Over at the New York Times, tech writer Farhad Manjoo takes on Twitter. That was one of the other things that Hillary talked about yesterday, a lot of Twitter bots. And some of that is accurate. And I don't really like Twitter. I use it every day to tweet out my latest podcasts. And I look at it occasionally, but I think that this guy Manjoo has it right. Twitter makes the news dumber. It's insidery and clubby. It exacerbates groupthink. It prizes pundit-ready quips over substantive debate, and it tends to elevate the silly over the serious. And I have not commented on the mistweet by Trump, the typo, where he put out the word kofif or whatever it is, and all kinds of people have been distracting themselves with it as Trump, pulls us out of Paris and does a lot of other nefarious things. And I do think that Twitter does promote that kind of distraction. So then Manjoo goes through a kind of disgusting metaphor of using the human body as a model for Twitter, and the output, which he doesn't call shit, but I guess infers is shit. He said Twitter acts as the small bowel of digital news. It's where political messaging and disinformation get digested, packaged, and widely picked up for mass distribution to cable, Facebook, and the rest of the world. And then he cannot resist to use the Seth Rich case and invoke conspiracy theory as a reason that Twitter is bad. And as you know, I really take umbrage at the idea that we're not allowed to consider the possibility that the murder of Seth Rich was somehow related to the DNC leaks, not hacks. And still, they are trying to be gatekeepers on this issue. And in our final few minutes today, I've got some important stories from California. We have a new single-payer bill that is in the legislature. It's SB 562, the Healthy California Act, and the California Nurses Union, the National Nurses United, they have commissioned a study that they say shows that it would cut the current spending on health care statewide by 18%, that it would give the people who receive this insurance a total savings of 9%. And that California businesses, small and medium-sized, would benefit with savings of between 22 and 13%, 13% on the low side. Summarizing the bill, every Californian would be eligible regardless of age, income, or pre-existing conditions. There would be zero out-of-pocket costs, no high deductibles and co-pays. It has comprehensive coverage, all of the things that are included in Obamacare. They argue it would lower prescription drug costs, that we would not have the narrow insurance networks that drove me crazy under Obamacare, and that there would be no claims denials based on corporate profit goals. And a group called the Public Policy Institute of California just released a survey showing that the idea, the concept of single payer, of Medicare for all, is wildly popular. 65% of adults across party lines support it. But when they're told that raising taxes will be required to pay for it, approval drops to 42%. Among Democrats, Before you talk about the cost, the support is 75 to 18%. And after you tell them taxes will go up, 59% of Democrats still support it. Liberals supported 81 to 15%. When you tell them taxes will go up, their support is still at 62%. But it's Republicans who, of course, are opposed to it when you tell them their taxes will go up. They support they oppose the general idea by 66 to 28%, but their support drops to 23% if taxes have to be increased. So that is going to be a big obstacle. I certainly support it. Jerry Brown, I don't think, has taken a position, and he, of course, is a miserly fellow who may avoid supporting the single-payer bill. Also, a tip of my hat to Elizabeth Ferrari, a great listener who lives in Fresno, California, and she tipped me to a recent development where a woman who's highly respected as a professor and as a former dean, her name is Vida Samian, has resigned from a search committee at California State University, Fresno, because she feels that the administration interfered because the 4 nominees that were forwarded to the dean for one to be selected for the esteemed Edward Said professorship, they all have Palestinian or Arab ethnicity, and their nominations were opposed by pro-Israel observers in the Fresno area. And it appears that the administration caved to the pressure from pro-Israel groups, and they closed the search without selecting a person for this job. I have attempted to reach out to Professor or Dr. Samian, and I hope to be able to schedule an interview with her and learn more about this in the near future. And finally today, Tesla is confronting 2 issues. Its founder, Elon Musk, threatened yesterday to resign from his unpaid advisory posts in the Trump administration if Trump pulled out of the Paris Climate Change Accord. We'll see if Elon lives up to that. But his company has fired the female engineer who a couple of months ago blew the whistle on pay issues, women being paid less than men, and on sexual harassment in the Tesla workplace. And as if to support claims of retaliation in the lawsuit that inevitably will follow this on behalf of the fired employee, Tesla said, despite repeatedly receiving special treatment at the expense of others, Ms. van der Meiden nonetheless chose to pursue a miscarriage of justice by suing Tesla and falsely attacking our company in the press. After we carefully considered the facts on multiple occasions, we're absolutely convinced that Ms. van der Meiden's claims were illegitimate. We had no choice but to end her employment at Tesla. This one we'll be hearing more about. Thanks for joining me today for my News and Comment podcast. It's free as always and available on YouTube. I hope you'll let your friends know. That's where they can find and listen to it on their phone or almost any other device. I appreciate your listening. I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.